Well, welcome to the Unstoppable podcast. We are here with a special guest today. He's been on the show before. His name's Eli Crane, and you are going to be inspired by him. Let me tell you a little bit about him if you're not familiar. He is a man of faith, a husband, a father, and a veteran. He's also an entrepreneur. One of the cool things I think that I love most about you is you joined the Navy the week after 9/11, and you spent 8 years as a Navy SEAL. I know that you spent a number of deployments overseas, specifically in Iraq. And after 5 deployments, I know that you made a change in direction. I know that you and your wife had a lot of success on Shark Tank. You got a deal with Mark Cuban and Kevin O'Leary with the company Bottle Breacher, which is one of my favorite brands. I know that you're also part of the Sig Sauer firearms family. And most importantly, and most recently, you've decided to run for U.S. Congress in your home state of Arizona. Eli, welcome back to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate it.
You know, the reason that this segment is so important, we'll get right into it, is because we're just coming off another one of the tragic school shootings in Uvalde, Texas. And the president's spokesperson just said that the president is not interested in hardening our schools, which stuck out when I heard that. It's not a priority, that gun laws are his priority. What is the difference, Eli, between a hard and soft target, and why is that statement so important?
Well, it's important because, and this is going to sound like I'm just trying to bag on the president, but this isn't the first issue where it clearly shows that this administration is not interested in looking at the real issue. They're not interested in what's going on at the border. They're not interested in going down there. They're not interested in the opioids or fentanyl that's coming over that southern border. It's the leading killer in, adults 18 to, I think, 45. They're not interested in any of that. They're not interested in making our lives easier when it comes to what's going on at the, with energy, at the gas pump. They're not going to reopen the Keystone XL pipeline. And that right there, alone could change things really quickly for the American pocketbook. And so this, to me, is just an extension of this administration's failure to look at the root issue of any of these major problems that we're facing as a people. Yeah. And I like to call it the cul-de-sac of stupidity, because this is what we do every time there's a school shooting. Yeah. We focus. The focus always goes to guns, gun control. This, that, and the other thing. And what people have to understand is, first, you have the constitutional side of it, right? We have a Second Amendment that guarantees us our unalienable or God-given rights to bear and keep arms. And then you have the fact that there's more guns in this country than there are people. Yeah. So even if you were able to pass an extended background check, which is what they're looking at now, or some of the high-capacity magazine stuff that they're looking at now, in most cases, it's not going to keep any of these kids safe. Okay. Yeah. And so you have to look at this pragmatically, and I look at it, and you talked about soft targets, hard targets. I was in a profession for several years where this is how we looked at everything. Is this target that we're going to go hit, is it soft or is it hard? What makes it hard? What makes it soft? So what gear do we need to bring? What does our strategy need to be if we're going to go hit this target and assault this target? And that's how you have to look at these schools as well, because that's how these madmen and these psychos that are coming in and killing these kids, that's how exactly how they look at these targets. And so let's shelve the gun thing for a second, and let's look at the fact, and I'm talking to parents here. Yes. Because there's this disconnect between academia, the president of your school, the superintendent of your school, and securing your school. Because these guys, and I'm not trying to throw shade at them at all, because they don't grow up, they're not trained in academia to look at soft and hard targets. It's not what they do. They're learning Shakespeare and history and math and English and all of these things that it takes to make a nurturing, protective, environment for our kids to grow up and learn. And so they tend to have this idea that, well, the police are going to take care of this issue, And if you look at police response, even in good neighborhoods, it's usually around 3 minutes. And so I'm
Yeah.
asking parents, how much time do you think one of these um, one of these individuals can come into your, what do you think they can do in 3 minutes
Oh.
in a good neighborhood? What do you think that they can do in a regular neighborhood where the response time is 7 minutes? And even in places like Texas where you saw police there, and even in Florida, we've seen, resource guards that, didn't necessarily do what they were supposed to do. Um, in my opinion, Jimmy, the only way that we change this and keep our kids safer is for parents to get involved and to demand the safety of their kids by hardening these soft targets that our kids go to school in. And Jimmy, I
Yeah.
actually had this experience in Arizona when I left the Navy and came out here and enrolled my kids in a school. And I did a tour of the school, and I realized that not only was there not, my kids started in a public school here, then they went to a private school here. And the public school at the time had better security than the private school because at
Wow.
least the public school had a resource officer there.
Mm.
And most of us that understand defense know that usually the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
That's right.
And I'm not talking about ideals here. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about, mom, dad, I'm not talking about if that makes you feel comfortable. Okay. Because we're well past comfortable here.
Yeah. It's just a reality, right? I mean,
It's the reality of the situation. And so, but then when we moved our kids to this private school, and it was phenomenal academically, but as far as security wise, it was a very soft target. And so I voiced some concerns, and then I set up a time where I could go and talk to the superintendent. Very nice man, man I have a lot of respect for, and was doing a great job with educating the children at this school. But there was a massive disconnect. What I'm talking about, and I told him, I said, "Sir, I think it's great that you guys are doing a great job of educating our kids, but if you can't keep them safe, it doesn't matter."
that's
And I
right.
said, "This is an extremely soft target." I said, "There's multiple holes in the perimeter. Okay, you don't have a resource officer, you don't have an off-duty sheriff." And then I went into some of the other things. Even in their perimeter, they had trees and branches that just hung over the walls, so it basically made a bridge for somebody to just come over the walls. And I asked what their plan was, and it was just completely unsatisfactory. And that's going to be what it is on average, because I've gone and done other threat assessments at schools, and most of these individuals, God bless them, they have no idea what makes a soft target hard. And so that's the only thing that's going to stop this. And so I do have a list, Jimmy, for the people that listen to your show.
Yeah.
The parents, these are some of the things that they can go and look at if they want to, if they want to assess the hardness or the softness of their kids' school.
Well, before you do that, because I want to focus in on that. I think one of the things that you mentioned was, one of the compelling things is that you took action right away. You discovered that this new school, it looked vulnerable. And I think that's the point, right? Are the kids in an environment that's vulnerable? My wife and I, so we homeschooled. We've put our kids in private school with security. We've put our kids in public school, so we've experienced all three of those as well. And the variety of the levels of security vary depending upon someone's awareness of it. And as you said, the public school is more secure than the private. Our private school had one entrance in. It had a gate that was, interestingly enough, very rarely manned. So although we had a gate, you could get through it. And then there were a whole host of other entry points into each of the schools. In hindsight, now looking back at it, this idea that we can post a sign that says gun-free zone. The gun-free zone sign makes that a target, doesn't it? Doesn't it make it softer? You're advertising that no one on this campus is going to meet you with force if you intend harm to our students?
100%, Jimmy. And this goes back to looking at every facility. You almost have to put your mindset in the mindset of the wolf or the perpetrator or the person that's going there to do harm to people.
Yeah.
And you have to think to yourself, okay, if I wanted to do harm to this facility or to people within it, how would I do it? What would
Yeah.
make it easier for me? And like I would want, if I was going to be in that spot, I wouldn't want anybody to be armed. I would want my job, I would want my progress to be as unimpeded as possible. And so
Yes.
it blows my mind that people still think that putting those signs up is really helpful, because it's really not. It actually does the opposite in many ways.
I mean, think about this, right? At my home, I advertise that I have security.
Yep.
If you have a canine, you advertise that you have a dog. I mean, you want someone to see that and think, oh, I don't want any part of that. And, most people don't want any part of a dog. I can tell you that right now. I just met with the canine group here in Colorado, and there's not a single person that's not afraid of that type of dog. But it's interesting. One of the things that I think is most compelling about the way you approach this is you talk about the root causes. So before we get into the threat assessment and then what I'm going to ask you specifically what you would do, before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the causes. Is there I hate to say this word because it's become so demonized, but is there a profile of the type of person who typically commits these attacks? And what are some of the root causes surrounding what would make someone do this type of thing?
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert on, the profile of these individuals. I know a lot of what many people do as far as typically they're young males. But one of the things that I do know from my own research and from the research of others is that one of the biggest indicators and even data points that most of these individuals share that is so sad to me it's not being talked about is between 75 and 90% of them are fatherless. To me, when I learned that, I was like, oh my God, that's like, to me, that's the smoking gun. Nobody's talking about that. If we were talking about that, it would change. I think it would change the way we look at young men in the fact of, oh my goodness, hey, where's your son at? Where's your nephew at? Where's your grandson at? Is anybody loving on him? Is anybody spending time with him? Is anybody a sounding board for him? Is anybody watching what he's doing, who he's talking to, what he's spending his time doing? And, I think that if more people understood that that's one of the, biggest connectors that most of these young men have, I think it would change a lot, because I think there'd be a lot more oversight from the community and the family on these young men. And most of them, Jimmy, they're hurting young men. They're hurting young men. Nobody's really shown them the ropes. They're fatherless. Nobody's initiated them into masculinity. And so often, they get screwed up. Oftentimes they're addicted to something. And they end up going and, doing something completely stupid to prove to the rest of the world that, I am a man. I have what it takes. Listen to me, look at me, pay attention to me. And it's pretty sick and pretty demented. But if they were getting that love, that protection, that feedback, that discipline from somebody, and typically a man within their circle of influence, that has the potential to stop a lot of this right there.
Yeah, I think so. And, I think that's a kind of a wake-up call for some of us who maybe do have families that are intact. We have families with a strong male presence, but there are many, many families around us that don't have that. And there's ways that we can step in, either as a coach of their sports teams. It's engaging with your neighbors, engaging with your extended family that may not be in the same situation. And I often think that a lot of our moms are just absolute heroes. Their effort when they don't have the husband in the home, the father in the home, what they have to do to wear both of those hats and provide for the family is absolutely heroic. So we can step in, I think, when we see these vulnerable kids and say, hey, could I be a positive influence in this young man's life? Can I engage in that way?
Yeah, and Jimmy, I think it's important to say something here when you kind of delve into this issue a little bit more. When you talk about, the these moms and, everything that they're doing, and God bless them. I mean, oh my goodness, when I travel a lot, I did in the military. I'm traveling a lot now. And when I look at what my wife has to deal with when I'm not around, and when I look at other single moms in my community, my hat just comes off to them. And I'm so proud of what they do and how hard they work. But this is something that's very important. John Eldridge writes a book called Wild at Heart. Yeah. And one of the things that he talks about in his book is masculine. He talks a lot about masculinity. And I've seen this in my own life. I think it's very important that we acknowledge that masculinity can only be initiated by masculinity. Okay? What that means is the final touches that need to be put on a man can only come from another man. And I know that that's not going to be popular in this culture where we don't even know what a man is anymore because we're not biologists. But the truth of the matter is, and this is one of the reasons
that actually was funny. That actually, right. I know.
Right. This is one of the reasons I went off to the SEAL teams, is because every young man's number one question in life is, do I have what it takes? Mm-hmm. Do I have what it takes to be a doctor? Do I have what it takes to be a Navy SEAL? Do I have what it takes to be a father? Do I have what it takes, to be respected, and on and on and on? Yes. And that initiation, and it's been this way throughout culture, for a long time, where the older men in the tribe will often take, the younger up and coming men off on some type of journey or hunt or whatever it is as the culmination of their masculine journey, and to welcome them into manhood. Yeah. And when we don't understand that, and we have a society and a culture that's so wayward that we struggle with what's a man, can a man have a baby, right? Stuff like that. This is one of the byproducts of that. And so I'm not trying to be abrasive. I'm not trying to be harsh. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help people understand, if there is a young man in your influence, in your circle, that's not being initiated, that's not being loved on, that's not being discipled, that's not being protective, that's not being shown the ropes. This is how you become a man. Yeah. These are the things that it takes. It takes protection. It takes discipline. It takes hard work, and it takes a lot of sacrifice.
Yes.
This is the type of thing you're going to continue to see.
I think you're
right. And
it's
sad, but it's a reality.
I think you're right. We've created terms that didn't exist before, like toxic masculinity, which in essence, although there are people that are toxic, there are people that take things too far, that think that being a man is to be dominant, to be, and to be intimidating, and all the rest of the garbage that they associated with it. But the unintended consequence of that is that now we treat all men as though they're toxically masculine. And, there's three pieces of that. You touched on them. There's three pieces on that for me, that a man is responsible, a man is accountable, and a man is capable. And the only way, and you said it, the only way for a young man to be affirmed in these areas is to be affirmed by another man who is responsible, accountable, and capable. Yeah. And I think you're at the root of it. And I think there's even a bigger root beneath all of that, which is the need for God, the need for a strong faith, the need for the values and the virtues that get passed through that faith tradition. That relationship with God is so important, and we've kind of stripped that out, and now we just make fun of it. And I think we've got to get back to restoring that foundation in God, in Christ.
I couldn't agree more. That's been one of the things in my own journey, in my own walk, is, because every single one of us, especially as a young man coming up, every single one of us has those same questions, and we're trying to get those answers. And typically we're trying to get those answers from other men or masculinity. Yeah. And if we're being honest, even the people that we look up to, that we respect, our mentors, even our fathers or our grandfathers, they're flawed as well. They're flawed just like we are. Yeah. And that's one of the greatest things about having a relationship with God, is that, you can get a lot of discipleship from somebody that's not flawed. And so you're right. I think that so much of what's gone wayward and wrong with this culture is that we've rejected God. We've pushed him out of
Yes.
everything. That goes back to one of my favorite scriptures that says, draw closer to me and I will draw closer to you. Well, what's the opposite of that, Jimmy?
Yeah.
When you push God out of everything, I believe often he steps back and says, okay,
Yes.
do your thing. And I
Yes.
think often you get a hand of protection taken off you. I think often his favor is removed from you. I think that is,
Yeah.
something that is going on in this country right now, and it's very sad to see. But that doesn't mean that we can't. That doesn't mean that we can't do a better job of loving on the young men in our
Yes.
community.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we can't take some of these soft targets and harden them up.
That's right.
And if you've got time, I'd like to go into some things that parents can look for.
Yeah, let's do it. And, one of the things that you mentioned is, as a man of faith, as someone who has experienced freedom in Christ, saved by grace through faith in Christ, it's not about perfection, it's about a change in direction. And I experienced that in my life. My faith walk, it wasn't about that all of a sudden I'm perfect and I'm going to get it all right, but instead,
Right.
it was a change in direction and a change in desire. So now I realize, as someone who loves God, I want to show that. I want to demonstrate that. I want to please God in the way I live, and I want to serve and bless others. And so it is a change of heart. It's a change of direction, and I think that's what we need. And so thank you for bringing that topic up. And let's get into that threat assessment. So we've talked about how the fact that many of our schools are soft targets, meaning they're vulnerable, meaning they've got ways to go to start improving the security and safety of the kids. They're soft. When you talk about going into a school, because I'm going to ask parents to take this list with them to the school board meeting and ask their school districts to do this assessment. Give us a rundown on some of those elements for the threat assessment of the school.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've written articles on this before because I wanted to get it out to people so that parents understood, because unfortunately, it is going to take activism, from the parents to ensure that, not only are their kids not being taught critical race theory and other things, but that your kids are safe and they're protected in a hard target. And I'm sorry that it has to be that way. I don't like the fact that it is that way. And I know that parents don't either. Parents are thinking, oh my God, there's one more thing that I've got to worry about, one more thing that I've got to fight for. I get it. But these are the things that you need to look for when you go to your kid's school. One, is there a plan for an active shooter? Okay. I remember doing a threat assessment for one of my buddies' kids' school up in Phoenix. And it was ironic, Jimmy, because on the outside of the school, they had their the A+ sign on the outside. Hey, this is an A+ school. Well, when I was done with the threat assessment and the principal walked me around the school, it was an A+ school with a D- security system. And guess what? When I asked the principal of that school, who was a very professional, loving, individual, when I asked him, sir, do you have a plan for an active shooter? Guess what he said, Jimmy? No,
No
they
idea.
don't. He didn't. And this was after some of the most massive school shootings that we had in this country, which is why my friend asked me to come do a threat assessment. And so there's a lot of parents out there that think, oh, the professionals at my school, they've got it. They're on top of everything. And they are. They're professional people. They're squared away. I'm not saying that they're not.
Yes.
All I'm saying is they've never been trained to think in terms of this. And so we tend to avoid what we're not comfortable with or what we don't understand. And so often there's not even going to be a plan at your kid's school for an active shooter. Number two, is there an armed guard or a school resource officer? Like I said, and this would be one of my top ones, because unfortunately, often the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And real security, Jimmy, whether we're at the border, whether we're in Iraq, or if we're at our kids' school, real security is overlapping deterrence, okay? And that means it's not just a perimeter or a fence. It's multiple things. Then it's a resource officer. Oftentimes, and we'll get into this one in a second, but oftentimes if you form a good relationship with the local police department and they know that your school welcomes them, oftentimes when they're writing their reports, sometimes they'll come actually park their squad car at your school while they write
Yeah.
their reports and do their admin. What do you think that looks like to somebody that's getting ready to come shoot up your kid's school?
Yeah, it's so
It
great you
doesn't
said
look
that.
inviting.
It's
It
so
looks like,
great. Yeah,
yeah,
you're
it looks
making it
like
obvious.
it looks like, hey, I'm not going to get my 15 minutes of fame. I'm going to be stopped before I even get through the parking lot.
Yes, and
Okay,
I was
so
just talking to the police here in northern Colorado, and they said this. They said the exact same thing. Hey, we have
yep,
relationships with these schools. We'll go and we'll do paperwork on their campuses as an
yep,
obvious deterrent. I love it.
yep. So overlapping deterrence. Okay, so
Mhm.
now number 3, is there a solid perimeter wall or fence around the school? When I was growing up, most of our schools were called open campuses. Okay, they didn't have fence or walls, or we didn't really have the same problem that we have now. But you're starting to see schools scramble to make that transition, because if you don't have a fence, a wall, or a perimeter around any facility, you're just inviting people that are willing to do this type of madness to just walk right in
Yeah.
and start doing what they want to do. So that's very important. I actually did a walk around, Jimmy, with
Mm.
the administration of my kid's school, and we did a walk around of the entire perimeter to look for holes and even places that could be easily breached.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 4, and this is a big one, are there any trauma bags or
Mm.
life-saving gear on campus? Do the teachers or administrators have any, medical training? Okay, because oftentimes, and we've seen this over and over again, even if the police show up
Yeah.
quickly, oftentimes because these departments haven't changed their methodology or their SOPs, they'll be sitting outside in the parking lot with the parents
Mm.
before they get the ability to go in and deal with the problem.
Yeah.
And so if teachers, faculty, and staff have trauma bags strategically placed throughout the school, and we're not talking about millions of dollars here, we're usually talking about thousands of dollars of
Mhm.
investment, which I think most parents would even chip in for, to make
Oh,
sure that
yeah.
was life-saving equipment at the kids' schools. And then
Mhm.
teachers who actually had, some trauma training that could go help save the lives of kids until the paramedics or,
Mm.
the professionals arrived on scene. That's a huge one right there. You could save a lot of lives just with that
Yeah.
ability right there. And the reason I say strategically placed, Jimmy, is because if you only have one trauma bag or medical kit, and the shooter happens to be on the grounds next to or in the vicinity of that trauma bag,
Mm.
none of the faculty, staff, or teachers are going to go near that area. So that's why you need to have gear that's spread out north,
Right.
south, east, west. That type of thinking. Okay.
Mm.
Um, Next, do entrances have metal detectors or security controls?
Mm.
You know, that's a big one. Do people have to sign in? Do they have, before they walk on the campus? What's the protocol look like? That's something to
Mm.
take a look at. You don't want to make it just easy for people to walk on to, your kid's campus.
Yep.
Is there a monitored camera system on the campus and its surroundings? That's a big one too. Oftentimes if you have a monitored camera system and somebody that's actually watching it, sometimes you can see these threats approaching before they're even on campus doing what they want to do.
Mm.
And furthermore, Jimmy, if you do have this system and somebody watching, then that person can be talking with the police when they're waiting in the parking lot to make entry and go stop the threat, and signaling and directing them to where the threat is.
Mm.
All right. And it also helps in the investigation after the fact if you have these security systems and you can go through and watch tape
Mm.
and watch what unfolded, because a lot of the time law enforcement, as some of these threats evolve in our culture and society, they're adapting with their training
Mm.
and even how they deal with these types of situation by looking at data from the past. Okay, so
Real quick, that is such a big point because the police here said that they will utilize specific schools for training, active shooter training. They'll come in and they
yep,
familiarize themselves with those schools. Pretty wild.
yep, and that's my number. I'll just go real quick to number
Yeah.
10. Is there a personal relationship with local police departments
Mm.
and officers for the reasons that you just mentioned? And what we talk about with deterrence, because Jimmy, if the police have already been to your kid's school and the faculty and the staff has allowed them to train there, like on a weekend or something like that, then they already know they already know the layout of the school, so they're not guessing. Hey, where does this room lead to? And they know all the hiding places as well. Yeah. So let me go back up to number 7. Do classrooms have sufficient locking mechanisms? Can windows be quickly blacked out to prevent classroom visibility? This one is important, Jimmy. Most people don't understand this that don't have a background in maybe military or law enforcement. The sad fact of the matter is most of these classrooms have locking mechanisms. That's great, but here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that bullets most often will cut right through a wall like a hot knife through butter. Okay, unless it hits a stud or something, and even then it'll go through. Bullets will typically go through wood as well. And so why is that important that you have a shade or something that can black out the window? Well, think about it. If there's an active shooter on campus and you just lock the kids in the classroom, basically you just put the fish in a barrel. If there's windows and the active shooter can see through the windows and see where the kids, they're located in the southeastern corner over there, all I need to do is point my muzzle in that direction and just start shooting. Wow. Typically, the wall isn't going to offer your children much safety. And so if you're able to black out the windows, now the shooter doesn't even know if there's kids in there. So maybe he will just keep on going. So that's something that I hate to point out, but it is something you have to think about because of the reality of weaponry and physics. Okay.
Yeah.
Number 8, are there any types of security drills being run at the school? Is there a code word? Is there an alarm system where kids know, hey, there's an active shooting drill going on. This is what we do. And it's not just complete chaos. There's actually a plan and drills being run so that everybody knows what's going on. Okay. Number 9, this is one of the most important ones. I have friends that, actually are professionals in these fields, and they'll tell me, Eli, typically the number one thing that stops us from securing these schools, even when staff and faculty bring us in, is this: are decision makers and top level school officials open to assessment and allocating funding for improvement? Man. The funding is a big one. Even if you're going to try and get a resource officer or security officer or off-duty sheriff, often you can be looking between $75,000 and $150,000 annually. That money, we all know, is just not going to come out of thin air. Yeah. And then when you start looking at building a perimeter, security cameras, etc., it takes investment. And this is one thing that I've been really surprised. I've actually got in conversations with parents in the past who are, more interested in whether or not, the track has a new surface on it. And I'm thinking to myself, how are you prioritizing that above your kids' safety? And so point. It is a conversation that we need to have, and decision makers need to be willing and creative enough to go out and acquire the funding so that we can make these soft targets hard targets. And then we already went over 10. I'll just go to 11. Are there backup communication equipment or plans in case primary communications are down? And I say that because, it is possible at times for somebody that really knows what they're doing to cut communications, cut a hard line. Thankfully, we live in a generation of cell phones. Sometimes we have your janitorial staff or your security staff will have, backup comms, radios, walkie-talkies, etc. But those are important as well. And so those are some of the things that, parents can be looking for. Obviously, there's some that are more important than others. If I could only pick one as a concerned parent, it would absolutely be the resource officer or the security officer. And oftentimes, most parents understand now how big of a deal this is. It's even possible for you to go to your president of your school or the superintendent and say, look, we as the parents will chip in $1,000 a person. I know we can get 75 parents to pitch in so that we can have a resource officer, somebody here that's armed, that's willing to protect our kids until the cavalry arrives. And so
Yeah.
I know that's a lot,
Yeah.
Jimmy, but a lot of this comes down to education and whether or not we know what's going on, understand the state that our school is in.
Mm-hmm.
Are our kids safe? Do they have a chance
Yeah.
at being protected if somebody
Yeah.
comes to our school with the intention to do our kids harm?
Yeah. Well, this list is so helpful. And I know, on this list, there's 6 or 7 things that most of us are never thinking about. So you're
Yep.
giving us insight and tools and resources necessary. So let me ask you, I'll do a little rapid round. We'll do real fast questions. Would you use a canine? Would you use somebody that's there that's armed with a canine?
It depends. Sometimes those types of dogs, because of how they're trained, and I've been around plenty of them. We
Yeah.
used to have them all the time with us in special operations. They're great dogs, but oftentimes they can be a little bit more temperamental than your average puppy or dog, especially when they're around kids. They see a dog, they want to pet the dog, so that can raise that can cause some of its own issues. I think if the dog was acclimated to being in an environment with younger kids that were always wanted to pet the dog, maybe. But
Yeah.
I would just see that. I would just see some of the problems and some of the
Yeah. There's risks,
issues
right?
that could arise with a kid trying to pet the dog
Yeah.
and the dog snapping at the kid or biting the kid or something like that. So
Yeah.
if you have I think it's great when the teams that come in, have a dog with them because oftentimes you can release the dog and not put the officers in jeopardy. But
Yeah.
it would be I think it would be based on the dog and its training.
Yeah. So there's some risk to that. I get that. How do you feel about arming select teachers or people?
I think it's a great idea, but I do think they need to be trained. And
How
I
much
do think
training
that
would you require?
I would, this again isn't my area of expertise. I don't know what the state protocols are. I think that getting them with local law enforcement would probably be the best, way to make sure that you're protected from an insurance standpoint, and you're protected from a, just local governmental standpoint as well.
Yep.
I could recommend what I think would, the type of training I think would be good for them, but I also understand that there's a layer of liability involved in that as well that is not up my alley of expertise at all.
Yeah. One thing for sure is you probably wouldn't let everyone know who those people are, I'm guessing, because then they'll become targets, right?
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you for this. Eli, this has been a tremendous opportunity to really bring our parents up to speed. Every single parent that I talk to is nervous. They want to take action. They want to be empowered. And we're going to give them this list of things to ask that you've given us today. We're going to have a free resource, so that when they go to our website, they'll be able to sign up and receive an email with that resource. And what we're going to ask them to do is engage with their local school administrators and officials and board members to really make a difference.
One thing I do want to point out, Jimmy, and thank you for the opportunity, is this is not an exhaustive list. There are many other things. Some of these companies make these backpacks, that have Kevlar inside, which can be bulletproof depending on the caliber of weapon. Having your kid have a backpack like that they could go grab in a situation like that and hold in front of their torso, in a classroom, that's not a bad idea at all. And there's a bunch of other ideas. This isn't an exhaustive list, but at least it gets parents thinking about, okay, is this a soft target? Is it a hard target? What type of chance do my kids have if we are unfortunate enough to be targeted by one of these very mentally ill individuals?
Yeah. This is a super great starting point. And what we want to do is open up the conversation. We want to get parents enough knowledge to open up this conversation and that's why we lean on you. We lean on guys like you because you've been there. You have a very unique way of looking at things. You've got a lot of experience, and we're capitalizing on that. So I thank you for that, my friend.
Thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate the time, brother.
You bet. God bless you.
You too, man.